everybody, welcome back to the XZONE and to another episode. In the last week or so, Crash Bandicoot has been quite the subject that has come up, especially among PlayStation fans and gamers, core gamers from the very beginning until this point. And it was something that I wanted to give my own opinion on and chime in a little bit as far as my own personal views on Crash Bandicoot and his future in gaming. If you didn't already know, a little bit of history for Crash Bandicoot, taking you back a little bit, is Crash Bandicoot was developed by Naughty Dog. I'm not talking about Naughty Dog today, but I'm talking about Naughty Dog back in the early 90s, which had developed games for PC software and even a game for the Sega Genesis that was called Rings of Power, which in my personal opinion anyway, I didn't think was the greatest game in the world. But it was started by two guys. That was Andy Gavin and Jason Rubin. Andy Gavin was primarily the programming sort of a guy, while Jason Rubin was the art design and animation artist, and was also the former CEO of THQ, trying to save them and pull them out of the dirt before they eventually bit the dust. Naughty Dog today is run by Evan Wells and Christoph Balestra, and similar to the older Naughty Dog, Evan Wells is pretty much over the art design department and is the co-president of Naughty Dog, and Christoph Balestra covers pretty much programming and is the co-president of Naughty Dog as well. If you didn't really know, Evan Wells actually had a history with Crystal Dynamics, which were the developers of Tomb Raider back in the day, which was a really big hit on the PlayStation and also had its run on the Sega Saturn a little bit, but primarily took off and really was successful on the original PlayStation. There seems to be this commonality between Uncharted and Tomb Raider, but surprise, surprise, Uncharted is a lot the way that it was because Evan Wells had so much experience working with a Tomb Raider type sort of a game that it seemed to translate really well, and so there are those similarities. But Evan Wells wasn't necessarily alone when he came over from Crystal Dynamics, as Amy Hennig, surprise, surprise, who was the writer of Uncharted, also came over with Gordon Hunt, who was the director of mocap for Uncharted as well. And so there was this commonality between the three of them when they came over from Uncharted, just as some interesting tidbit on Evan Wells as the transition from Crystal Dynamics and working his way up to co-president of Naughty Dog. But anyway, Gordon Hunt and Amy Hennig really had their stake or their claim to fame with Legacy of Kain while they were there, before they came over to really work with Evan Wells at Naughty Dog. So Naughty Dog is pretty well known as well for Jak and Daxter, as well as the Uncharted series, and as of most recent, The Last of Us, which seemed to have that reputation with PlayStation that when PlayStation 1 had died out, Crash Bandicoot went with it. When PlayStation 2 came along, Jak and Daxter was created. When PlayStation 2 was all said and done, Jak and Daxter took its leave and Uncharted took over for the duration of the console until they did The Last of Us, which almost seemed like it was a little bit backward, as you were like, well, maybe they would have done Uncharted 4 for the PlayStation 3 and left The Last of Us for the PlayStation 4, but tradition has seemed to really broken itself as Uncharted 4 became the PlayStation 4 game, which will likely be the last one, and The Last of Us, at least so far, is pretty much by itself. So that was the history that Naughty Dog has had, at least as far as their IP goes. And so the question is, what about the return of Crash to the PlayStation, or Crash's return to PlayStation? And also, is it really in Sony's best interest to bring Crash Bandicoot back? The idea was that Crash would return, but the fact of the matter is right now, or as it has been in the past, Crash is no longer a PlayStation exclusive. The game has been on the Xbox 360 previously, it's been on the Wii previously, it's been on the PSP previously, but Crash Bandicoot has never really left Sony platforms. It's always been there. And Crash Bandicoot was brought about, by Vivendi Universal's partnership with Naughty Dog as well as with Sony Computer Entertainment, helping to bring it on the PlayStation, which was this big push for 3D games on a home console rather than the side-scrolling 2D. But the rights were sold off for Crash Bandicoot. Just sold to Activision. Activision is the current owner of the IP right now, who is best well known for Guitar Hero and the Call of Duty franchises on various platforms, as Activision is a third-party developer. So, are we going to be seeing Naughty Dog as developing Crash Bandicoot? No, I don't think so. If there really is enough of an interest for Crash Bandicoot, I'm pretty sure that Activision is listening. And if that interest is there enough, then Activision might develop another Crash Bandicoot game. This whole thing was brought about when the question was asked to Andy House, and Andy House had said, yeah, sure, we'd like to bring Crash Bandicoot back as a franchise on the PlayStation. And so things had really gone into an uproar. Andrew House is the current president and CEO of Sony Worldwide Studios. The fact of the matter is that Crash Bandicoot is under the ownership of Activision, which is run by the absolute, complete, and total demon himself, the CEO of Activision, Bobby Kotick. And if, this is going to happen, Andrew House is going to have to make a deal with Bobby Kotick, something that's just so great that it's going to be an offer that Activision just cannot refuse. Because Activision has a whole lot of money, and it's not really a huge loss to Activision to hang on to Crash Bandicoot necessarily either. Because they've got so much money that if that demand is there, they'll just develop another Crash Bandicoot game and release it themselves. But, Crash Bandicoot leaving the PlayStation as well and coming back is almost like Sega selling out Sonic the Hedgehog or Mario being sold out by Nintendo and then suddenly having this comeback. It's just really bizarre, it's really strange, and it's not normal, and it almost seems to have that same feel with Crash Bandicoot, as Crash Bandicoot was the mascot for PlayStation for such a long time. So really, who is likely the best candidate to develop a Crash Bandicoot game? Well, truth be told, it's likely going to be Nintendo. Naughty Dog really is just too busy with other games, and if a return to any sort of a franchise, it's likely going to be Jak and Daxter, as that is the franchise that they've talked about making that return onto PlayStation themselves. Well, then there's also Insomniac. What about Insomniac Games developing a game, as they've had, their development history with Ratchet and Clank, which turned out to be a really good 3D platform on the PlayStation. The thing with Insomniac Games is Insomniac Games right now seems to be having a pretty good thing going with Microsoft Studios and the Xbox One to develop Sunset Overdrive for the Xbox One, which is exclusive to the Xbox One, which means it's not coming to PlayStation at least anytime soon. And Ted Price, who is the CEO of Insomniac Games, seems to be pretty happy with how things are going with Microsoft Studios and is pretty, well hooked up with Microsoft and willing to work with them and find a success on there, trying out new waters with Microsoft with a different sort of IP that isn't Fuse, which Fuse wasn't really all that great anyway, in my opinion. So really, once again, Nintendo is likely the best bet for a successful Crash Bandicoot game on PlayStation. But we all know that Nintendo isn't going to do anything like that, because Nintendo has their own platform, they have their own mascot, they have their own console, and they're not going to side with Sony to co-develop anything, and it's likely going to be vice versa. Sony's not going to cross-develop with Nintendo to bring some sort of a franchise to both platforms. So Nintendo is pretty well out of the picture, so what's the best bet from there on out? Well, see if you can grab a former employee from Nintendo to defect to Sony and develop a Crash Bandicoot game for you. The truth of the matter is we know that Nintendo has that knack for developing great games, and this really is a sort of game that would come out of something like Nintendo that would see any sort of longevity on the PlayStation. Because with Nintendo, yeah, they would make an awesome freaking game. So with Crash Bandicoot, at least in my opinion anyway, it's really not in Sony's best interest right now. There have been Crash Bandicoot games that have been developed in the past for multiple platforms, and Crash has really just kind of lost his steam. It wasn't that the games on previous platforms were bad, and if you look at reviews, the reviews really didn't show it as being a very great game, but when you really look at it, the response to them is all the same. It's that Crash Bandicoot has been done before, that formula has had its run, and that there really isn't much of a way that you can change that out. and make a game that you really haven't played and done before. And I mean, really, truth be told, I loved Crash Bandicoot on the original PlayStation. In fact, when we got our PlayStation, Crash Bandicoot Warped was the game that we got and that I started playing, and I'd had every Crash Bandicoot on the original PlayStation since. The game really is, it's absolutely great, but the only way that Crash Bandicoot is really going to make a strong return and have a lasting appeal on PlayStation versus, let's say, Sackboy, is for Sony to really put that emphasis back on Crash Bandicoot, to really push and promote that exclusivity on PlayStation, and, you know, to try and keep up with Mario, which Mario is, at least in my opinion, has been pretty well the same experience on, you know, Nintendo platforms all along. It's, you know, Princess Peach has been kidnapped. You need to go and defeat Bowser to save her. And the exception in all those games is whether it's 3D or not, there seems to just be that commonality that the only difference is, you know, a different sort of suit that Mario gets to give him additional ability to get through the game. And so it's kind of the same sort of a thing over and over and over as well. Crash Bandicoot just wasn't able to change it up enough to really keep that interest for everybody there. So those are my personal opinions on Crash Bandicoot and its return to PlayStation, how I feel that it could be successful, and the only way really to go about it. And that's just my opinion. But go ahead and feel free to sound off in the comment section below with anything that maybe you feel could make Crash Bandicoot a success on PlayStation, or whether you feel it's really just not in Sony's best interest at all either. And from all of us here at the XZONE, thank you, and we'll see you next time.